Today I'm going to talk about policymaking and the budget within the bureaucracy. So if you look on your book on page 11, this is how policymaking in our government is defined. You have the people who generate concerns. You have the linkage institutions. They link the people to the policy makers, so the parties, elections, media, interest groups. You have policy agenda. This is the concerns. These are the concerns that become the political issues. Then you have the policymaking institutions. They make the policy. They are the institutions that make policy. That's the branches of government, including the bureaucracy. Then you actually have the policy that's been made. Expenditures, taxes, laws, regulations. And then, once again, we're back to people. Comes full circle, the impacts of these policies and how they impact the people. So, bureaucracy, by definition, is all of the offices and people within government who help make and implement policy. Many members of the bureaucracy are hired and managed based on the civil service. It is a system designed to hire and promote members of the bureaucracy on the basis of merit and to create a nonpartisan government service. Many are maintained from one administration to the next to help provide for a continuous flow of productivity and expertise. Parts of the bureaucracy, you have the cabinets. There are 15 departments, which you can see on page 411. The Treasury, they make money. They regulate the banks. The Justice, they are the Attorney General for the government. They're the attorney for the government. Defense, that's the military. State, Secretary of State, you're looking at foreign policy. This person or these people deal with policy between our country and other countries. Interior is natural resources, parks, wildlife, and then commerce is business and trade. The rest are self-explanatory. Parts of the bureaucracy, part 2. So independent regulatory commissions. They are not a part of any branch, but they make and enforce rules designed to protect public interest. Examples are the FCC, the FRB, and the SEC. So the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission, and they deal with communications. And right now, big part of what they're dealing with is internet and net neutrality. Federal Reserve Board, they look at interest rates. The Security and Exchange Commission look at stocks and how that affects us and what changes need to be made on any parts of those 3 examples. Government corporations, they provide a service that could be handled by the private sector, and they charge for their services, although their practices are usually cheaper than those in the private sector. Examples would be the Tennessee Valley Authority and Amtrak. And then independent executive agencies. They're appointed by the president and serve at his will. And that would be like NASA, the National Science Foundation, and General Services Administration. All right, regulation versus deregulation. You should have talked about this in econ some. I'll hit on it a little bit here, just in case you don't remember. Regulation is the use of government authority to control or change some practice in the private sector. It's more Keynesian. So they regulate businesses or they regulate things to control what's happening in the private sector. Deregulation is lifting of these regulations on businesses and professional activities. And it's more laissez-faire, more free market approach, hands-off. In general, Democrats tend to be more regulatory and Republicans tend to be more deregulatory, but that's not always the case. Types of policy. You have monetary policy, which is manipulation of the supply of money and credit in private hands. Fiscal policy, which is the manipulation of taxing, spending, and borrowing to affect the economy. Types of tax policies, progressive. With progressive tax policies, the richer you are, the more money you make, the higher taxes you pay. Regressive, on the other hand, is where the poor pay a higher percentage of their income. For instance, sales tax, because they make less, but they have to pay the same exact percentage of, or gas tax, as people that make a lot more money than they do. And then finally, flat tax, where everyone pays the exact same percent on their income. The reason, for instance, sales tax or gas tax might be regressive is because even though they're making a whole lot less. If they're driving to work and back and it's about the same number of miles as someone else that's making way more than they are, they're still paying that gas tax the same amount of money. So it's a larger percentage of their income. So if you make $1 million a year and you spend $1,000 on gas and $100 of it's for taxes, then you're paying a very, very, very small percentage. Where if you make $1,000 a year and you do the same thing, you're spending all of your money and 10% of your pay is going towards that tax. I know that's not usually a real situation where you spend all your money on gas, but there are people that spend a large percentage of their money on gas or clothes, and their taxes are a high percentage of their net income, whereas with people that make a lot more money, it's a much smaller percentage. Iron triangles and issue networks. So iron triangles are made up of government agencies, interest groups, and congressional committees interacting in the policymaking process. So you have a triangle, and each of those represents a point on that triangle. So an example would be the military-industrial complex. So you have the House and the Senate committees on armed services. They are the government. They are the congressional committee there. So they're the House and Senate. They're the congressional committee. And at the other end of the triangle, you have the defense contractors, and they are the interest groups. And then the third point of the triangle, you have the U.S. Department of Defense, and they are the government agency. And those three form the iron triangle because they they interact, and they're all a part of this puzzle. So it's very, very common. Politicians try to leave the government and go work for these interest groups. They aren't supposed to work for interest groups tied directly to their previous position, but that's not always the case. So, the budget. Deficits occur when expenditures exceed revenues. A deficit is year over year. So in 2020, we bring in, the United States brings in $4 trillion in revenue, and their expenditures are $5 trillion. Their deficit is $1 trillion. You add that to how much they already owe, and that is their debt. The 16th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution created the income tax, which increased revenue. You have controllable and uncontrollable expenditures. Uncontrollable expenditures would be expenditures that are determined not by a fixed amount of money appropriated by Congress, but by using a formula including how many eligible beneficiaries there are for the program. Entitlements, they are policies for which Congress is expected to pay X level benefits for Y level of recipients. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they're all examples. About 55% of the federal budget is made up of entitlements. The budget process. So in the budget is developed and reviewed by the OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget. In the winter, the president reviews the proposed budget, and the OMB prepares the final document to submit to Congress. First Monday in February, Congress receives the president's budget. It's first received by the House of Representatives Ways and Means Committee. Remember, they're the ones in the House that set all the spending and how much we'll bring in and how much we'll spend. February to March, the House and the Senate budget committees analyze and edit the budget. April 1st, the budget committees create a resolution that act as an agenda for the remaining budget process based on the committee process. And April to June 30th, both houses act on the current resolution, and they complete action on the appropriation bill. October 1st is when the new fiscal year begins.